Welcome to the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where Wendy, Chris, and Eric explore the latest news stories, their work, and trends for creating and maintaining a healthy workplace culture.
Okay, well, welcome to episode 47 of the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where we talk about all things culture related, and we make the case that if you're not paying attention to the health of your workplace culture, you're missing out on opportunities to really execute on your strategy in the best possible way. My name is Chris Downey, and I am not usually the main host. I am filling in for Eric Stutzman, and I'm here with my regular co-host, Wendy Loewen, and a special guest, Mel Bazin, who is joining us today. And we're going to explore the idea of reconciliation and what that means for organizations. But before we do that, how are you both doing? Maybe Mel, how are you doing? And then over to Wendy.
Doing great. Yeah, looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be great.
Okay. And you're just back from St. John's.
Just back from St. John's, watching my niece play in the Canada Games. Yeah,
Okay.
That was fun.
Softball.
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. That's exciting. We were just having a conversation off air about how gorgeous it is in the East Coast. So that's always a great energy to come back from, for sure. How about yourself, Wendy?
Well, I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm also looking forward to, I'm part of a book club, and we're meeting tonight.
Ooh.
And yeah.
What is the?
Well, it's a book that I don't necessarily want to recommend because I had a lot of criticisms of the book. I was looking forward to it, and it was thought-provoking, but it isn't a book that I would hand off to someone and say, read this.
Are you comfortable sharing? I am curious.
Okay, sure. It's called The Courage to be Disliked, and it starts with saying, the book begins with talking about the fact that, trauma isn't a real thing. It's about how you frame it. And it's like,
Ooh,
we're
it's a bad
starting off.
start
We're
right
not starting
yeah.
off on the right foot here. So.
I got the tension in my stomach just this. But you're looking forward to book club itself.
Oh yeah, and the group of people, the conversation, it will yield great conversation, regardless of whether I would hand the book off and recommend it to someone else or not. What about you, Chris? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I've told everyone that's asked me in the last 3 or 4 days this. I'm doing great. My daughter got back last Thursday from 3 weeks at camp, which is a long time. Not long for her. It was easy for her, but very difficult for her mom and I. So it was great to have her back. And she was, of these 21 days that she was at camp, 11 days were spent out canoeing and tenting on the lake that they were on. So, and when she showed me on the chart all of the areas that they've covered, it was like I was really both kind of impressed and proud of her. But it's always good to have the family unit back. And so that just gives me a good energy. So I'm doing well. And it's also, as much as I love summer, it's getting into August, and it's starting to get a bit cool in the evenings. It's kind of signs of fall. I really like fall. I find that as much as I love the looseness of summer, I find that near the end I start to crave some of the structure that like the school year brings and all of that. I get back into my rhythm. So those are two reasons why I'm doing good. So let's dive in here. We invited Mel, who's, of course, as way of introduction, I realized I just didn't even introduce you, Mel. Mel's Director of Indigenous Services with us here at the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute and CTRI and ACHIEVE. And we've invited Mel in because we really want to talk. One of the things that Eric, Wendy, and I have talked about numerous times is the idea of reconciliation in organizations and really just talk about what are organizations doing, and what are some of the options, and what does that really mean? So that's the subject we're going to dive in on. And of course, as usual, we will conclude with a couple of rants and raves. We've got a couple of good ones we'll share at the end. And as always with the podcast, we'll end with some actionable items based off the content that we're going to be talking about, some takeaways that the listeners can perhaps take away and implement in their own workplace culture. So maybe a way for us to get started here is recognizing that while a large part of our listener base is here in Canada, not all of them are, and some are in other areas. When we talk about even the idea of reconciliation or truth and reconciliation, let's maybe frame it up in the Canadian context. Mel, I'm wondering if you can maybe tell us a little bit, when we even say truth and reconciliation, what are we talking about?
Right. Well, I think Canadian context, I think of our Indigenous population here, right? So First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and what we've learned from the past and how that impacts the future. And so that's what I think of in our Canadian context when I think of reconciliation.
Yeah. So what can we learn from our past? How does that continue to shape our future? And how do we do better?
How do we do better? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess kind of a thought here is, why should we be thinking about this in the context of workplace culture? Because there has been lots of talk federally, we've talked lots about truth and reconciliation. Of course, there has been a lot of work that has gone in. Some great discussions are happening within our across our country. Not everyone's aligned either, but there's been a lot of conversation that has gone on, and we've seen actions taken. Why is it important that within our workplaces we're talking about reconciliation?
Well, I think there undoubtedly are Indigenous people in workplaces.
Of course, yeah.
Right? Not just that, there's a lot of workplaces that are working within Indigenous communities or for Indigenous community in some capacity, either entering the community or doing work for a community. And all of that means that we need these relationships
Right.
to be meaningful and to be open to learning from each other.
Yeah. Relationships. Mel, you've mentioned something there, and I think I've asked you before, what does reconciliation mean? And you've talked about relationships in that context. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think you're pulling on a thread that's pretty important here for us to explore.
Yeah, so I see reconciliation as building relationships. And more than just building relationships just to have it, right? It needs to be a meaningful relationship.
Right.
And often I like to talk also about it not being extractive,
Right.
that the relationship should be reciprocal.
Right.
So you're learning from each other, not just one way to the other way.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Wendy?
Well, I think, Mel, what you're saying links directly to how we think about workplace culture, that you're talking about reconciliation, building meaningful relationships, restoring relationships, that we in the workplace have actually a unique opportunity to be able to do that. And so the conversation around reconciliation, what does it mean for us as organizations, seems something pretty important for all organizations to be thinking about. And, with the Truth and Reconciliation and their calls to action, there was this initial sort of here in Canada interest in implementing them, but it kind of has lost a little bit of its fervor and the desire to make it a reality. And I think in our workplaces, we actually have an opportunity to do so, and a responsibility as well, not just an opportunity, but a responsibility.
Right.
So I think the conversation is pretty important if you are a leader in an organization to be thinking about what does it mean for you, whether in the public it's brought to the light and or highlighted or not, that it is both it's a responsibility and an opportunity for us, both of those.
Yeah, I like that, Wendy, that idea about something you had said. I want to tie into this, that why should we even be talking about this as organizations is one of the things, as you've mentioned. Well, our organizations reflect the society that we're operating in, of course, and of course there's Indigenous peoples within our society, but again, it's about relationships, shared relationships, whether you're Indigenous or not. This is part of the shared story that brought us to where we're at today. And as you mentioned, Wendy, I think it's an important conversation to continue, but I also think it's something that we need to make sure that we're taking action on. And the sense that I shouldn't say the sense I get, I know myself, I struggle with this sometimes, getting caught up in conversation, but not necessarily acting on that. There was some great conversations that happen,
Right.
but then what? And as you mentioned, Wendy, there's actually a responsibility here because we operate and do business in this place. We actually have a responsibility. How do we keep the conversation going, for one? Why is that important? And then how do we translate that to action that's somewhat meaningful? I'd put that question out to both of you.
Right. Well, and I think what comes to mind when you were just talking about all of that is also the importance to know the history. And why that's important is a lot of our workplaces are still built on very colonial structures. We're still working within that.
Yeah.
And so it's important to understand the history of how that all came about and how that history impacts today and what we can then do to sort of
Right.
change small steps even, right?
Sure.
To make things maybe a little less colonial and more inclusive.
Yeah.
And I think, Mel, as you're saying that, I think a lot of leaders, myself included, there's a little bit of tension around that because the word reconciliation, even in and of itself, means restoring right relationships. But when we think about colonialism, there were not right relationships in what happened. And so the system that we are working within currently is a capitalistic, it is a colonial system. And so are we asking, by virtue of that system, are we asking Indigenous peoples to assimilate into this system that in and of itself is a colonial system? And for me, that is that's a tension point that I'm trying to, on my own read and learn and think about. Because this is the system we have. And then it can very easily feel like, oh, it's hard to think about what the next step is. And yet those little steps, this is a process. There's not a script. And that relationship and those conversations are really important. But I think there also is sort of this bigger systemic issue that we just need to maybe even acknowledge and just say, this is the elephant in the room and this is what we are working with.
Yeah. And I think that part of that responsibility on how we can move forward with reconciliation is for everybody. Everybody has that responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So you talked about like, how can Indigenous people fit into these colonial structures? I remember that being awkward for me, right? Having to shapeshift, having to be somebody I'm not to fit into a system.
Yeah.
And it's my responsibility to no longer do that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Same as it's an organization's responsibility to create a space that makes it more comfortable,
Yeah.
that is inclusive, that listens to all people, right?
Yeah, and that's built on restoring relationships, building relationships, and creating a sense of belonging.
Right.
Well, I think there's so much that's very loaded. What you just said, there's lots there. I want to kind of unpack a number of those things that you mentioned, but not only to mention that I did use the term shapeshift to try to fit in, and it's your responsibility to do. Just how uncomfortable that must be. I think everyone can relate in some capacity. Everyone's had that moment where they've maybe had to fit in. I can't imagine what that would be like in general society, just coming from a place of privilege. I'd be very uncomfortable because it just kind of defies our natural state, I think. But one of the things you'd mentioned going back a little while ago about really understanding our history and why that's so important. I think, Wendy, I'm going to maybe bring a few things together here. One, you're right. We are part of a capitalist society, and that continues to move forward, and we have things that we need to do. True. And we also have this history that's at play, and I think there's often this desire, well, let's just do better. Let's just start taking action and make things better. But it's that understanding history, I think we're often, when I do think about a very Western approach, even to how we operate business, it's like, hey, what next, what next, what next? And we don't actually spend a lot of time really thinking about history. So tell us a little bit more about the importance of making sure that we know that in a shared way.
Right. And I think for me, the way I see the world, everything's interconnected.
Yeah.
Where all of us are interconnected and everything is interconnected,
Yes.
which means that the past is the present, right?
Okay.
So if you think about the history of colonization, that history impacts what we're seeing today.
Yes.
Those effects of colonization can be seen, they can be felt, right?
Right.
And so it's all connected, and it's important for us to know where we've been so that we can know how to move forward.
Right. Yeah. And to really understand where we've been in a shared way.
In a
and
shared
I think, as you were saying before, this isn't the responsibility of, an Indigenous person to come in and understand that history. It is our shared story that we need to understand so we can move forward in a better way as opposed to just moving forward. Because I think we've had a lot of moving forward, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's been in a better way, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Mel, I'm curious to know your take on if we think about the past and history and, we learn about colonization. And you said this earlier, that's the past, but it's manifesting itself in the present. And that's what we have to also come to grips with. It's like, it's not just knowing about the past. We didn't learn it in school in our history books. So now we're learning about the history of Indigenous peoples, from Indigenous people. But it also is saying, okay, how is that impacting our workplaces, our society today? And then what do we do with that?
Right.
Yeah. I can't help but think about, as you're saying this, Mel and Wendy, as you chimed in there, when I even think about the work that we do with organizations. Of course, we go in and help create healthy workplaces where people actually enjoy working, right? We want to create a healthy environment where people can come in, have their needs met to some degree, and do well while they're at work. And one of the foundational pieces in the work we do with clients is making sure you understand the story. Right? How did we get to where we're at today, the good and the not so good what are the realities that exist? And it's from that shared understanding that we actually can start to move forward. And I feel like that's still part of where we're at right now. And I think when you were even mentioning, in some cases, maybe even because it's not as in front and center in the media, that some organizations have backed off a little bit. And I think maybe now is the most important time to actually keep that conversation, because that's the responsibility. If we're an organization, we could use our organization as an example that really cares, that is committed to doing things better. Mel, you talk often about, and actually I'll do a plug for a blog post that you wrote recently on inclusion, and you talk about the difference between performative inclusion and meaningful inclusion. I don't know if I'm getting that exactly right, but how when the spotlight is not on an organization, but an organization that cares, how can they do something that's really meaningful, that's not performative, if that's the case?
Right.
I don't know if that made sense where I was going with that.
Well,
I think what you're getting at is how do you practically, as an organization who might not be an Indigenous-owned organization, who that might not be their work front and center, how do they act? What do they do to start that process? They might know about the history, and now they're like, okay, what's next for us?
Right.
Yeah.
So a few things to go back to, like knowing the history. I think a lot of people will say, well, I know the history of the residential school system.
Sure.
And that's one part of
Yes.
it. And I think there's so much more history that people really need to understand. There's layers and layers that now impact today. So I think it's important for people to really dig into all of that. But how do we do this? How do we move forward? I think relationships is one of them. And to your point on performative versus transformative, I think a lot of people will have, a lot of organizations now have policies that they need to hire Indigenous people, for example.
Right.
That's one step.
Yeah.
And hiring is not where you end.
Yeah.
It's inviting those people then to the table, hearing their perspective, understanding how their perspective might change how we do our work.
Yeah. Mel, you said something that really resonated with me about knowing the history. And you mentioned before about the past is today, because it continues to show itself in various ways, whether it's through the systems, the decisions that we make. And something I've never really thought about before, but knowing the history, like you said, residential schools is one thing, but there's lots more to this, is actually thinking about our organization and how that history influences our organization today and how we operate. I don't know, and I'm curious actually if you've even had this conversation, Wendy, with other business owners, Mel, with any peers. Are people really thinking about that history and how it actually influences not the obvious stuff, but the underlying aspects that it might be continued? You know what I mean? Like, how is that how is that history showing up today, even here at ACHIEVE?
Yeah, Mel, I would be very interested to hear your perspective. Like when you walk into workplaces, what are the things that you would be looking for, either positive, oh, this is obviously an organization that's committed to reconciliation, or there's some questionable things going on. What would be those visible signs for you, those tangible markers?
I think, if we can look at the history and how, even where we are personally on that history
Sure.
of, on our shared history, where we can find ourselves, our family, and then our organization too, and what parts play there. But I think if organizations are open to hearing all employee perspectives, that's usually a good sign. And more than hearing, it's actually trying to understand, and trying to take that perspective and have it inform some of the work that we do, right?
Yeah.
So that we can have a shared understanding of the world and not just one way of seeing things. And I think adversely, if you go into an organization and you see, yes, there's Indigenous people working there, but their voices are not being heard and they're not invited around the table, that might be a red flag.
Yeah.
No, that would be extractive,
Yeah.
to use the phrase that or the word that you used earlier.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because I think while we're talking specifically about reconciliation, we're also talking about, you said, a marker of an organization that is really committed to doing things, I'll just say better, let's just even say that, is, and I'm going to steal something from the blog post you talked about. You didn't talk around the table, you talked about around the fire, right? All voices are invited around the fire. And as you were mentioning, not only so they're heard, but those voices actually then inform what you do in some way, if I'm hearing you correct. That would be to you a marker that, okay, yeah, this organization.
Yeah, that's
is doing something.
transformative.
That is, absolutely. And what I really like about that is, well, honestly, that's just common sense. Like, I know I'm going make it sound really simple here because it's easier to say than do, but that goes so beyond reconciliation. That goes.
That's a healthy workplace.
That's a healthy workplace. Is where, as you said, all voices are welcome around the fire or the table or whatever that. We'll use any analogy that we want. Whether I think for me, as we're talking through this, what can organizations do? As it relates to make a difference from a reconciliation perspective, is to take the concepts that we're talking about and apply them, but even broader. This is not just an Indigenous matter. This is a human matter where we want to create environments where people can actually thrive. And I think our workplaces are the spot to do that. Because as we've already acknowledged, wouldn't it be great if we could change all of the systems outside of workplaces? We can't. But we certainly have a massive influence on how people experience things here. So I'm loving that. So if we're seeing, what does that look like though to you? If you're actually seeing, how can we catch someone doing it? You know what I mean? Because this is where I'm trying to get away from the performative piece, because it sounds good.
Right.
Everyone's welcome around the table. We hear everyone. How do we know it? Like, you know what I mean? What does that look like behaviorally? And that might not be a fair question to ask, but how can we actually spot it and go, yeah, that's happening? What might we be seeing?
I think we would see people that are happy to be at work.
Yep.
People that feel comfortable sharing their perspective, that they're not, censoring perhaps some of the things that they would say. And sometimes it might also mean that there's some difficult conversations that happen. Yep. Some disagreements, perhaps. Maybe there's differing perspectives, but that the environment is such that you can have those conversations.
Yeah. So you're actually having the conversation, and we're not tiptoeing.
Right.
And we're actually, So people are generally happy to be there. That's a great marker for sure. But conversations will be happening, including some of those ones with some tension. But it's not even that I guess having the conversations is a marker, and it's how those conversations happen becomes super important.
Yeah, I'm wondering about something. When it comes to reconciliation, we're talking about all voices at the table matter. And I think we are all in agreement. But if we live in a country where there has been wrong done and brought forward through, in our context, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and their report and other ways that we know, is there not an additional onus on organizations to prioritize staff knowing about that history, building awareness that, yes, all voices matter, but in addition to that, we have a responsibility to learn about Indigenous peoples and the history and to make better.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think at minimum, right, we start there,
Right.
the knowing pieces, and providing opportunities for staff to know that history. I think that's a really good place to start. But then the question often becomes, then what?
Right.
Right.
So now we know we've taken the time to do the training. Now what do we do?
Yes.
So that's when, we talk about the teaching that I shared in my blog about everybody being invited around the fire. That's how my parents lived. That's what we always did. Everybody's invited around. And when you're invited around the fire, you're in a circle, everybody's perspective is equal.
Right.
There is no hierarchy, right? And so workplaces that can adopt that kind of environment are likely healthier.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think
exactly. That's a great
that's
point.
well articulated, because I don't want to, when I talked about the kind of the common sense point, to your point, Wendy, I think, while we could say all voices matter in the fire, we recognize there are certain voices within our society, within Canada and elsewhere, that have been oppressed. So there needs to be more focus on making sure those voices are heard without question and learning the history. And that's what I'm hearing from you is, now from that, then how do we take that and apply that larger? Because that really is how you create a healthier environment,
Right.
Where everyone is.
So that means allowing space for that voice
Yeah.
to take up space in the room, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we might have to be quieter so that
Yep.
somebody else can share.
Right. It's been a learning for me.
Yeah.
How to keep myself quiet sometimes. No, I mean, I'm joking about it, but the reality is it has been a bit of an evolution for me as well through just this journey, not just as it relates to reconciliation, but just, of course, I didn't realize all the privilege I had coming into this world. I was just born into it the way that I am. To me, I just assumed when you start talking, everyone turns and starts listening to what you have to say. And that was a really difficult thing for me to realize that, oh no, not everyone necessarily is starting from that same point. And there are times, Chris, when you just need to
Right.
be quiet.
Well,
Listen. But I'll be honest, that sometimes can be difficult.
I think what you're saying too is understanding your positions of power and privilege. I think
Yes.
that's very important too
Yeah.
within
Yeah.
organizations for people to understand
Yeah.
your power and privilege points. And then sometimes if we do have that power and privilege, it's our role then to amplify voices that might be a little quieter.
Yeah.
So that's another actionable step, right, that we can take towards reconciliation, is to help amplify those voices.
And Mel,
Sorry, go ahead. See there, I'm taking more oxygen out of the room. Go ahead.
so for our listeners, if you mentioned hierarchy earlier and you just mentioned amplifying voices, so is one way of working towards reconciliation to take a look at your hierarchical structures within the workplace? What are the power differentials and what are the things that you might want to rethink or possibly rejig?
Yes, or even how that hierarchy might feel. Not necessarily what it looks like, but
Yeah.
how does it feel to people?
Right, yes.
Yeah. I really like that.
How it's experienced.
Yeah,
How's experience?
Something that you said there about understanding the power and privilege, I think is really key. Because even something you'd mentioned around how you grew up, every voice around the fire, which is great. There is no hierarchy, which I love in concept. But of course, there's power dynamics, right? And that is going to influence. So
Yes.
my takeaway from this conversation even is understanding the power dynamics, regardless of how you're structured. I mean, you might want to pay attention to that, but we could change the structure, but that might not change how people are experiencing things, right? We could flatten the organization visually, but that's not necessarily going to change some of the power dynamics that are. So we need to understand them so they can then be used in the right way,
Yes.
right? So it's experienced. So many different ways we can explore this. I've got 5 more topics on a podcast we could talk about. But we're talking about a lot of things. I think there's some really interesting stuff here. If I'm a listener, I'm a business owner, and I want to do something, but I don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do?
I think, like we talked about earlier, that basis of understanding the history, that's a really good place to start.
Okay.
I think the next step then is looking at how you're building relationships.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Tell us more about that,
Relationships with people in your organization that might not have the same background as you.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding their perspective and their worldviews and how they see things and how they experience your organization.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good next step. And I think it's important that that relationship is reciprocal, that it's not extractive. You're not sitting there gathering information just for your benefit, that you're also giving while you're receiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like that.
You know, and what I'm thinking about, Mel, as you're talking, even thinking about people outside of our organizations, it's very easy to use, vendors or access services from people we know or from what we've done before. But to broaden our gaze and, look up a bit and go, oh, what are our relationships within our organization, but also outside of our organization as well? Are there ones that we've been maybe closed to that we should open our doors to?
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that, so I really, so again, if hearing the 3 points, one is just understanding our history and making sure there's a shared understanding there, and correct me if I'm wrong here. But then the next step gets into those relationships, and so you're saying, Wendy, whether that's within our organization or even outside of our organization. And then through that understanding relationships, making sure the relationship is a reciprocal one, right? And not extractive, as you were mentioning, which already I can see the common sense to it and how that actually run afoul to a bit of a colonial system. Because often in business, it's how can we get something out of this?
Right.
And this runs kind of opposite to that, but still leads to better outcomes. So I think you can do this and be profitable and successful as a business, but without kind of leaving people behind is a key takeaway. But one of the things we talked about earlier is just, I think a lot of people are hung up in where do I start? Like I said, understanding the history, but there's almost a hesitancy to just get started.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people afraid of misstepping.
Misstepping, yes.
And when I sit with elders, they always encourage us to make mistakes.
Yeah.
That's what we always learn, that
Yeah.
That's how you learn, is
Right.
by making mistakes. And so I think if you have relationships that are reciprocal, it's a safer place to make mistakes and to
Right.
misstep. And I think we're far better off misstepping
Right.
than not moving at all.
Yeah.
Because through that misstep, we can understand, okay, I know more now. I've learned something. So it's
Yes.
actually a step forward in a lot of ways.
A misstep is a step forward because we've tried.
We've tried something.
We've done something. That didn't work, but
Didn't
we've
work.
learned, and now we knew. So if I'm hearing this, for those listeners that are just maybe, I always use the term stutter stepping, holding back, knowing we need to do something, do something.
Yeah, do something. Make it be with the right intention.
With the right intentions, yeah.
But yes, do something.
Yeah.
And as you're building those relationships, you'll be checked if you misstep.
Yeah.
And you'll learn something, and those are really good steps forward.
Absolutely. And I'm loving that advice. It's such sound advice that applies to like every aspect of life. Just try it.
It really does.
Because if we get ourselves caught up, even building this business case before we do something, we sometimes get caught up in that. It's like, let's just try that. It's the roots of innovation even, right? And
Right. Like, stop getting ready to be ready.
stop getting ready to be ready. There's our quote. Stop getting ready to be ready. I love that.
Yeah, no, Mel, that's such valuable guidance and thoughts. And in relationship, you feel the freedom to misstep because there's
Right.
going to be that truthful, honest conversation, and you're also free to ask the questions that I think a lot of people might have, but they hold back.
Yeah, and have those conversations. Like I know Chris and I have had great conversations about some topics that could be really difficult for some people if they don't have the right relationship for it, right? To be open to ask questions,
Right.
to disagree, right?
But that is rooted on that idea of it's a safe space.
Right.
Ask the question, and then how we respond is so important. Okay, there's so much here. Know your history, how it continues to impact today, and I would even say relative to your organization. This is let's contextualize it to your organization because it does. Let's not pretend that it doesn't. It absolutely does. Next is getting into the relationships, and this isn't sequential. Doesn't have to be, but that next is understanding those relationships. Both internal and external, and then making sure that that relationship is reciprocal, not extractive. And don't be afraid to misstep.
Don't be
Just
afraid to
get
misstep.
started. I love it.
And then if you think about so I'm seeing a braid of sweetgrass as we're talking about all of this
Yeah.
because the present, the past, the present, and the future are all interconnected
Yes.
in sweetgrass teachings. So I'm seeing this all connected, right? We understand the past, we're building relationships in the present, and then we can see how this could impact the future.
Yeah.
And it could be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to kind of wrap this up in a braid. I love it. I love it. So much more we could talk about, but just from a time perspective, I think we'll probably have to cap it here. Mel, thank you so much for your insights. I shared with the group before we got started that I'm a little all over the place today, just because I have a lot going on, and I am so focused now, thanks to this conversation, which is great. So thank you for that. Now's the time, though, where in our show, where we like to actually talk about some good things we're seeing out in the world and maybe not so good things, kind of our rants and raves section. I think we have two today. We'll start with a rant first, and then we'll maybe end up with a rave. And Mel, I think you have a rant to share with us.
Yeah, and I like the idea of ending on a positive, so that's good.
Okay.
I was sitting with family members recently, and we were talking about mental health and mental health initiatives in workplaces, and how it's something that is really important to a lot of workplaces, but yet when it comes time to taking time off for mental health, it's really difficult. The processes are difficult, and even it's frowned upon to take that time off. And so how that disconnect from the value of taking care of your mental health, but yet the practice of doing it being so difficult.
Yeah.
And it just highlighted the importance that the culture of an organization needs to match the value.
So true, and it's interesting. I'm imagining that conversation with these folks in your life, that it's almost more discouraging to have that values incongruence of someone saying we value your mental health, but then we make it difficult in taking the time, as opposed to at least you say we don't care. At least then it's almost more disillusioning when that's the case. And I think, as I'm even hearing this, it lines up with lots that we talked about now.
It really did.
Right? That your actions and the systems that you operate need to reflect what you state as a value that's important. Because if it's not, if we truly say we value employee well-being and we create systems that are against that, that's the experience they're going to create.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, that's such a powerful story, because not only is the individual struggling with, well, I'd like to take a mental health or a wellness day, and now they've got that they're dealing with, but they've also got this like mixed messaging and
Sure.
dissonance from the leaders that are saying, oh, this is part of what we're giving and you should be taking. It's like, well, really, now I've got these two things that just do not match up.
Well, and that's the real, there's so much that's upsetting about that, but the real sad part is sometimes that can actually then create doubt,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? It's like, should I not? Maybe I shouldn't be worried about this. Maybe I should be here because Joe's here, and why am I not here? And that's the last thing we want for somebody when they're not well.
Yeah.
I'll just
Or
say
maybe
that
I
well.
wait till I'm really not well to take it, and that's not what we want
They're
either.
at a breaking point. Okay, yeah, that is frustrating to hear. How about let's go to a rave here. Tell us something good, Wendy.
Okay, I have a rave, and it does link to setting up systems as well. I recently was talking to somebody who had taken a new sales position, and they had anticipated that it was going to be about, they're supposed to move product and sell things. And yes, that was expected. That was actually their job. But the company that he worked for had set up their systems in such a way that they created a culture where their staff took so much pride in the work they did. And it was a culture that was very customer centric. And the way they did this was every sales that happened, every product that moved, there was always a client referenced in there, and they had to keep notes after the sale was done. And so if that customer ever came back, needed warranty or had questions, they pulled up the file, and that file was to go back to the initial salesperson. But if it didn't, they had enough information for somebody else to be able to step in and to personalize the response to the person who was looking for support, to the client.
So nice.
It really, really is. And their take on it, I mean, they're early on in the job, but they said, we as salespeople take a lot of pride in writing out our notes and taking interest in the clients that are coming in. But the clients who are coming in for customer service or warranty work, they feel so cared for. So this business is doing really well. And I think about that as culture by design. They've set up their systems in such a way that the expectations and accountability are creating the kind of workplace that is, and one of their values is to be customer focused, and they just nailed it.
And what a good example of reciprocal relationships.
Yeah,
That's
it
exactly
is.
what I was going to say there. Yeah, that's understanding the relationship and then creating some reciprocity in that relationship. Wow, that's awesome. It's a good way to end things here.
Yeah.
So again, Mel, thank you so much for your insights. I know we just scratched the surface on so many things, and I'm looking forward to more conversations with you because I've got a bunch in my mind already that I want to follow up. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mel.
All right. Well, reconciliation and what does that mean for organizations? What a great conversation. I'm so grateful to have Mel participate in this podcast with us because, as is always the case when I get a chance to talk with Mel, she's got me thinking here. And I think one of the real takeaways for me is we need to be paying attention. And this isn't really something that's optional. If we are choosing to have a business and do business where we are, we need to take this on, and there's three key things that really landed with me. First is understanding our history, and not just understanding the history of our country, but understanding how that history actually is affecting how we do our work within our organizations today, how we make decisions, how we hire, all of those things. So really understanding that history, and then understanding those relationships that are so important, both internal relationships and also external relationships, and making sure that the voices of those relationships, that everyone's welcome around the fire or the table, whatever analogy we want to use, so that those relationships are tended to, and they are reciprocal relationships, not extractive, as Mel mentioned, but reciprocal. We're getting something, we're giving something. That's the key piece. So know your history and how it's impacting things today. Understand those relationships, making sure those relationships are reciprocal. And don't be afraid to misstep. Let's not get caught up in waiting until the right time. Let's try something and learn. If we misstep, that's okay. We learn from that, and that's how we grow, and that's how we do better. Listen, folks, I loved this conversation. We realized there were so many things that we just kind of touched on. If you enjoyed this conversation, reach out to us, or even if you didn't enjoy the conversation, reach out to us. We love to stay connected with our listeners. And let us know, what did you hear? What did you appreciate? What do you want to hear more about? I encourage you to follow Wendy, Eric, myself, and Mel as well, Mel Bazin on LinkedIn. You can check us out on our website, achievecenter.com. There's all sorts of resources there. And do stay connected. We want to hear from you. We've heard from a lot of our listeners in the past. We want to continue that relationship. Most of all, folks, thank you for taking time to listen and actively participate with us. I know many of you do, so we appreciate the time commitment it takes to listen. Thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you again in a month. Take care.
Looking for free resources, training, and consulting in the areas of leadership and workplace culture? Be sure to check out AchieveCenter.com. That's Achieve, CENTRE.com.